But the expert on the law, seeking self-justification, pressed Jesus further. And just who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, there was a traveler going down the road from Jerusalem to Jericho who fell prey to robbers. The traveler was beaten, stripped naked, and left half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road. The priest saw the traveler lying beside the road, but passed by on the other side. Likewise, there was a Levite who came the same way. This one too saw the afflicted traveler, but passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, who was taking the same road, also came upon the traveler and, filled with compassion, approached the traveler and dressed the wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then the Samaritan put the wounded person on a donkey, went straight to an inn, and there took care of the injured one. The next day, the Samaritan took out 2 silver pieces and gave them to the innkeeper with the request, look after this person, and if there is any further expense, I'll repay you on the way back. Which of these 3, in your opinion, was the neighbor to the traveler who fell in with the robbers? The answer came, the one who showed compassion. Jesus replied, then go and do the same.
Good morning. I stood here a few months ago and encouraged all of you to help out with the loss of Jane, and little did I know I would be up here. I couldn't say no to the worship committee being one. So just by way of introduction, I've never been to a theology school. So you're going to have to take it for what it's worth. I have nothing really to offer, especially after Pam's great intergenerational. I chose this passage because it's my favorite. And so we've heard about neighbors, or is it neighbors, the last few weeks from Larry and Weldon. And so the purpose of this is to kind of discuss the character's motivations, how we might see ourselves in situations like that. Please feel free at any time to raise your hand and I will call on you. Hopefully it becomes interactive and more of a sharing thing. So to begin, I thought I'd read the definition of neighbor. And I'm sure we all have one. There were 3 of them. One who lives near or next to another. That's pretty simple. A person or thing adjacent to or located by another. That did not surprise me. The 3rd one did. A human being like oneself or fellow person. Never thought about that. So moving on with our story then, I added verse 27. It's usually not part of the reading. It kind of sets the tone, but I find him, the man, trying to justify himself by saying, who's my neighbor? And it reminded me of the story of the man that came up to Jesus and said, I've done everything you've said. You know, I've loved my neighbor, I've given tithe, I've prayed, and Jesus said, well, great, sell everything and come with me. Nope, that guy wasn't so justified anymore. So, and I believe this is the same thing, that the scripture is ready to tell us how much we should love our neighbors. And so another man, that I assume he's probably a Pharisee or a Sadducee, wanted to know who his neighbor was. Who do I have to be good to? Who do I have to be kind to? Well, then Jesus gave him what I call a Christ curveball, because he interjected the Samaritan. And I think of the same thing when the Pharisees went to Jesus at the temple and they were going to trap him. You know, we have to give the tax. And then Jesus gave him a curveball. No, whose picture's on that? Give that to God, give the rest to Caesar. So, and there are a few of them. There are a lot of Christ curveballs. The Sermon on the Mount, the way he turned things upside down. So the parable of the Good Samaritan. I'm a history teacher, so you're going to get a little lesson whether you like it or not. As Pam said, the Jews and the Samaritans did not get along. They worshiped in two different places, same God in two different places, but they couldn't get along. And really think of the current hatred between the Ghazians, the Israelis, Northern Ireland, and England from years ago. Anytime you have two groups that are vehemently opposed and probably literally hate each other, that was the situation between the Jews and the Samaritans. And at this time, Rome, the way Rome used to rule was they picked local people and let them kind of control their population. Well, the Jews got a little out of control, looking for independence, waiting for this Messiah. And so Rome finally appointed a governor, Pontius Pilate. I'm sure that you've probably heard of him. And so he shows up, and this was supposed to be the beginning of law and order, but it really didn't establish anything. Out in the countryside, it was lawless. You could do what you want, basically. And so that's where the robbers lived. They lived on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. And, I often thought, what's the big deal? A road. Well, you find some stuff out. Jerusalem is 1,200 feet above sea level. Jericho is 850 feet below sea level. So as you either go down the road or come up the road, you can't go very fast because it's so steep and very winding. And it had a name. It was known as the Way of Blood for two reasons. One, because of all the robberies. Two, because the iron oxide had turned the sandstone red, kind of like Moab. So let's get on with our story. The victim. We don't know what his business was. We don't know what he did. We don't know much about him. But my question is, why did he undertake this dangerous journey? He wouldn't be the first guy to get robbed. So why did he go on his own? Is he convinced that he could handle it? And is it pride before the fall? As they say, I found myself many times, I can do this. I don't need any help. Well, not being very mechanical minded, the first time I tried to change my oil, didn't work out. Had to swallow my pride, call a friend. What do I do? So that's part of it, is that, and we put ourselves into temptations. I won't give in to that, or I won't give in to this, but it's on the road of life, and we do that sometimes. Why? Because the robbers, they'll be next. Victims of the system. We still have that in existence today. You can't justify, I guess, stealing or things, but if it was a choice between feeding my family or not, I'm pretty sure I would break the law. So there wasn't a lot of work at that time in Judea, so could be kind of sympathetic towards the robbery, but stripping and leaving him for dead, that's a little bit much. But we still see that today in what we call the pack mentality. And we see it on social media. It's all, I don't know, for lack of a better word, I'm not very current with the lingo, but we used to call it dogpiling. You just pile on somebody. Did you see that? Yeah. And then everybody gets in. And in my own life, I was much younger then. I was in juvenile hall, and they brought this other kid in. This was in Las Vegas. I knew no one. So they brought this other person in, and everybody else in the room knew who he was. And so I still don't understand why, but they threw a mattress over this kid and started punching him, and then they looked at me, and it was like, okay, well, I got a choice to make. I could stay back and then have them think that I would tell on them or whatever, or I could join in. And so it wasn't the right choice, but I joined in for fear of maybe having that happen to me. So just the idea that we get caught up, and it happens. My Lai, the massacre, some of you might remember from Vietnam, and more current things. I'm sure in the deed that Hamas did in killing the Israelis, there was probably some of that pack mentality. And I'm sure it probably occurs in the Israelis. And so how would you like to be the victim? wherever you were going, your nice little ride gets interrupted, beaten, stripped, and left for dead, literally helpless. I don't know if anybody has ever been literally helpless, but I could imagine it's not a good place to be. You're there, and you can't do anything. And so the man's lying there, and here comes a Levi. He's a priest. So I'm sure if I was the victim, I'm thinking, this would be pretty good. Well, I'll get some help. And the priest was forbidden from touching any dead body. So like Roger did, first priest comes by, looks down, and goes around him. And so he wasn't even going to check on the guy for fear that if he was dead, then he shouldn't have done it. If he was well, then what was he going to do? So part of this, I guess I took away from it, was how many times I used the rules to avoid doing the right thing. I mean, that's pretty simple. And I think of Jesus eating on the Sabbath, healing on the Sabbath, and having the Pharisees say, well, what are you doing? It's the Sabbath. And again, another curveball. If your ox fell in a hole, would you go get it out on the Sabbath? Well, of course. So why wouldn't you help this guy? But the priest goes on his way, thinking he did the right thing, justified, I'm going to heaven. The next guy comes around, he's a Levite too. Both the priest and the Levites were forbidden to touch any dead body. And it was more so of a prohibition on the priest. But this fellow does the same thing. Comes, looks at the man on the ground and says, well, I don't have to touch him because I'm doing the right thing. And so I thought about, well, how about stand your ground? I can do the right thing and still kill somebody. That's a good one. Or capital punishment. That's another one. We're doing the right thing. So both men felt pretty justified. Then the Samaritan comes. Traveling in a place, he's not welcome. No Samaritans here. Samaritans around back. Samaritans use that drinking fountain, not our drinking fountain. So he comes, but he's walking along. He sees somebody that needs help. He didn't care whether, I believe, he didn't care whether the guy was a Jew or not. Somebody needed help. So he stops and helps him. And I'm pretty sure if the victim was Jewish, he wouldn't have given the Samaritan man the time of day. Before he was helpless, then he became his best friend. So I like how Jesus explains it. When the Samaritan comes up, he took pity on the man. And I found that to be interesting because later on, Jesus changes that term from pity to mercy. And in my mind, pity is kind of like, oh, I feel sorry for you. Mercy is when you're going to do something. So he picks up the victim, binds up his wounds, and as the Bible says, he used expensive oils and wine to help the man. So right now, becomes interactive. If you've helped bind up somebody's wounds, stand up. Corpus Christi, Porto Assis, the Repair Network, stand up. You're helping. So just take a look around. We are good Samaritans, and that's what we strive to be. Thank you. And you think of all those things, and you've heard the litany, the Albino Project, the LGBTQ community, all of those things that we're involved in. So let's move on. Here comes the innkeeper. Here comes the Good Samaritan. I'm sure when the Samaritan came in with the victim, he probably thought twice, what's this Samaritan doing helping this Jew? What's wrong with this guy? So he, money is a good thing, I guess, because it opens a lot of doors. And the Samaritan then went up to the innkeeper and said, I'd like to pay you for taking care of this Jew. And so I'm wondering, at that point, did the innkeeper even think if he was Jewish? Wow, this is something different. It's a good thing. So the Samaritan pays the man up front, says, if this isn't enough, when I come back, I'll settle up with you. So then I thought, well, did the innkeeper jump on board? Did he look a little bit different? Did he cut the Good Samaritan a rate break, you know? Hey, you're doing something for this guy, I can do something for you. Did it change the innkeeper's view of the Samaritans as good people as opposed? So, and that's how it is. If you've ever helped or been helped by those people, and we all have those people, did our attitudes change? Did I look at those people differently? And so that's part of it, changing of attitude. And so Jesus asked the guy, who is the neighbor? Who did the right thing? The one who had mercy, Jesus said. So you take the pity, you put it into action. And Jesus said, go and do likewise. Likewise, anyway. And one of the best questions I've ever heard about this, and you can join me if you remember. Would you be, could you be, won't you be my neighbor? Thank you.
For a hymn response, let's turn to 789, Be a Sower, number 789. Be a sower, plant a seed, let it grow into a tree. Give it water, watch it grow, and give it the love that it needs. Be humble and gentle and always keep looking for peace. God makes a sunrise on the good and the evil, rain fall on the rocks and the weeds. Let's be loving to one another, join in God's circle of peace. Be a listener, listening close, when you find a friend in need. Talk to Jesus, Jesus knows, and He'll give you comfort and peace. Be humble and gentle and always keep looking for peace. God makes the sun rise on the good and the evil, rain fall on the rocks and the weeds. Let's be loving to one another, join in the circle of peace. Be a dreamer, work for peace, turn your sword into a plow. With our neighbor